Negotiation. Is it chess, poker, or a cage fight in white gloves? Is there such a thing as a non-zero-sum game when talking with Russia? Diplomacy is war by other means, according to Clausewitz. Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Communication is key, and very much like in the life of mundane, it's difficult to see eye to eye in politics when conflicted parties speak different languages. Take the ongoing war in Ukraine. To end it, one has been speaking democracy, the other, the dictatorship parlance. But of utmost importance is the will to have a conversation at all, and will, it seems there is.
Putin is ready. We are waiting for signals. Everyone is ready.
From what I hear, Putin would like to see me, and we'll meet as soon as we can. I'd meet immediately.
As seen in Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Russia's demands have remained unchanged since the beginning of the invasion. No NATO membership for Ukraine, no NATO weapons and troops in the alliance's post-1997 editions, and legalizing Russia's territory grabs in Ukraine. All of those demands are purely pragmatic. However, as history has taught us, in the game of realpolitik, Washington has been more successful than Russia. The 1969-1972 strategic arms limitation talks between the US and the Soviet Union aimed at curbing the nuclear arms race during the Cold War were a classic example of realpolitik in action. The negotiations saw both sides keep their ideologies of capitalism and communism out of the picture and prioritize national security instead. Realpolitik laid at the foundation of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, signed in 1987 by US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Reagan's military buildup and strategic defense initiative forced the Soviets to the table, showing that diplomacy was driven by strategic positioning, not idealism. Meanwhile, Gorbachev recognized that competing in the arms race with the US was unsustainable. Instead, he resorted to arms control to reduce economic strain and improve relations with the West. Economic stagnation and the failure to keep up with the US military led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. However, it was also Washington's realpolitik that helped the country transform into the Russian Federation to prevent chaos and a nuclear crisis, as per the START I treaty signed on July 31, 1991. The 2010 New START treaty under Obama was about ensuring US nuclear superiority in a controlled way. Given Washington's supremacy in terms of conventional forces and missile defense, reducing nuclear arms didn't weaken the US. At the same time, it allowed Russia to reduce its arsenal without coming across as weak, especially given the totemic value of nuclear stockpiles. Today, as Washington and Moscow mull over the words peace talks ever more often, one may hope that the principle of realpolitik will ensure a just peace for Ukraine and security guarantees curbing Russia's expansionary appetites.
Our guest today is Witold Rodkieiwcz, the Senior Fellow at the Russian Department in the Center for Eastern Studies here in Warsaw. Welcome once more to the programme.
Thank you for your invitation. It's always a pleasure.
Great to have you. We're talking generally the theory and practice of negotiation. Probably a lot in the Russo-Ukrainian context is theoretical so far because we've built up an expectation that there's going to be negotiation, and Russia doesn't necessarily need to agree to any negotiations, does it?
Yes, I think the Russian approach up to the moment of Donald Trump's victory in the United States would change the situation and I think change the Russian approach. The Russian approach was basically to wait for the other side to surrender. They were saying always that they are willing to negotiate, but they set the terms that were basically the terms of surrender.
Yes.
In other words, all the objectives that Russia set for itself when it invaded Ukraine, when it attacked Ukraine, and actually when it started its indirect aggression against Ukraine back in 2014, were treated as something given, as something that's really not non-negotiable, The last few months, in fact, Mr. Lavrov was saying we are not posing any conditions. This is just the requirements of international law. This is, we are just about implementing the statute of the United Nations, and this is all about every civilized government should be this kind of talk, which is. Again, since we are talking about negotiations, I mean, this is the PR is a very important part of the Russian art of negotiating, and setting the terms and sort of persuading the other side, even before the negotiations started, that certain things are simply should be taken for granted and are really non-negotiable because they are just natural and they just come sort of they are in the air. They are so obvious that there's nothing to discuss about.
You said about the idea of the Russian side preparing the diplomatic, the negotiating battlefield instead of the real battlefield in the trenches. It's all one battlefield for the Russians, but how does the Russian art of negotiation differ from the Western art, if there is a difference between the two philosophies of diplomacy?
I think one major difference that I already mentioned is this Russian approach, which treats the entire situation as part of the negotiating process. In other words, it's not just the talks and even the PR and the sort of, which you mentioned, diplomatic background, but also the situation as a whole. I mean, in that sense, the Russian refusal to have a ceasefire is part of that. They want to talk while at the same time their army is exercising pressure, is going forward, and in that sense, shifting the ratio of power in their advantage. In that sense, the facts are supposed to speak louder than words, and the logic of the situation should force the other side to concede. I think that's the major part. As far as the very technique, I think when you look at the Western textbooks for negotiation techniques, you see a lot of things that sort of are completely are exactly opposite to what the Russian school of negotiation would advise.
You mean by the kind of the game theory?
I'm talking about there are Western business schools. They teach the art of negotiation. There are textbooks, so you can. And one of the things is that you should always try to be emphatic. You should try to take into account the interests of your other side. In other words, this is all the process that's intended to find a common ground and compromise, and you shouldn't push your partner too hard, and so on and so on. I think this is completely, if you observe, because the Russians don't write textbooks for negotiations. But when you observe the history of negotiations, you'll see that their approach is completely different. So you stake maximum demands. You're willing to play out and to play the long game, and you're willing to accept the lack of agreement for a long time, lack of the result for a long time, and usually, very often it is not the agreement that is the objective. The objective is to gain advantage overall, and it's part of a complex game, of a complex game. Game is the wrong word. It's a struggle. It's a diplomacy is war.
Mutual,
exactly, and this is
sides.
Because in the West, I think in the Western mentality, these are either you fight and then you have a war, or you move to a different stage where you have diplomacy and you want to reach an agreement. Whereas in the Russian side, this is a seamless continuum in which you use different tools, in which diplomacy is a kind of a tool in their toolbox. The point is to defeat the enemy. The point is to defeat you. In other words, this is a 0-1
yes.
logic. It's not a non-zero negotiating game. It's a war.
In that case, they were very successful. The Korean conflict, negotiations dragged out over a couple of years whilst the war was still fighting. We know from the Polish experience the Yalta, Tehran conferences. And you mentioned the 1920s, the Soviet diplomacy achieved considerable success. They've been very successful at in their style of negotiation.
Yes, and because it also includes the shaping of the environment and especially hiding your weaknesses and being very good about identifying the weaknesses of the other side. So again, to go back to the 1920s, early 1920s, where they were very weak, they wanted recognition, but they didn't want to really give up on the fundamental issue that was the problem, and that was that they had these two-level foreign policy in which they, on the one level, they recognized existing governments, on the other, they conducted revolutionary activity and supported illegal parties and financed them, provided weapons, and so on, in order to, to foment revolution and to destroy the governments with which they wanted to have official diplomatic relations. They were desperate to get to have economic relations, but they hid it very well, and they were able to impose their terms. For example, they were able to reject the condition that they should pay all debts of the Russian state, and basically they achieved unconditional recognition without any. It took some years. It took, in the U.S. Case, the U.S. kept its refusal longest till 1933. But still, with England very quickly, with France 24, with England basically 21, 22.
Moving to the current phase of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, in that sense, from what you say, as I understand the Russian philosophy of negotiation, they've actually scored a diplomatic victory by President Trump is now on the stage. He's set to shape the diplomatic battlefield from his side. Ukraine seems to, albeit reluctantly, commit to the loss of territory in the war. It's a considerable diplomatic victory for Russia without more fight. Well, obviously they're still fighting, but without huge amounts of capital and expenditure in terms of lives.
Well, I think that the Russian side thinks it's in a better position. It's winning the war. It hopes that Trump is going to basically accept various arguments they put forward, namely that spending money on Ukraine is not really in the American national interest. But they are also for them, they think they might be able to manipulate Trump and to gain everything very quickly and make him concede things that the previous administration and many European countries wouldn't, simply by redefining what's important and what's not, what should be important, and playing to his various how to put it,
human frailties,
beliefs. But they also I think by now they are quite nervous, because it seems that for whatever reason Donald Trump is not behaving as they expected. because they thought that that Trump is going to ask them to invite them to negotiate, which is, by the way, this is one of the things in their technique. You don't ask the other side to negotiate with you.
Force them to.
You wait till they ask you. You already establish, who needs more, who is more willing to make concessions.
And Donald Trump's a very experienced negotiator, isn't he?
Well, I really don't know. I have no idea. But so far, he made the situation into a very uncomfortable one for the Russians, because he, in fact, started negotiations in public. The Russians hate that. The Russians would like the negotiations to be carried within the, secluded, secretive milieu.
Palace in the Crimea?
Yes, exactly. Because basically, because they're bandits, and what they demand is really outrageous. And it's not, the discussion about their terms in public is not, they know it's very uncomfortable for them. So they're beginning to get nervous. I think the recent, there were actually two, on the 24th and 28th, Putin himself gave interviews to a special kind of journalist. There were special interviews, specially recorded, on the topic of negotiations. The first one was on the 24th. It was very strange because it was full of various offers to Trump, offers that were supposedly appealing to his pecuniary interests. It was quite naive.
Let's cut a deal.
Yes, he was saying, we are both oil-producing powers, and so it's in our interest, should be in our interest. Basically, he was offering him a kind of a cartel arrangement. He was clearly nervous about. He was spent a lot of time talking about how harmful to the U.S. the sanctions are, which is kind of weird. He was clearly nervous about that, and they are waiting for the call, and they are saying, yes, we are open, and I think we are. If Mr. Trump continues for a bit more, perhaps we'll get to the point when they all call themselves, which would be already a change of logic and a breakthrough. The second thing is that the Russians are trying to present their demands as something that has already been agreed upon. It's not a coincidence that Trump and that Putin and Lavrov are all the time referring to this Istanbul agreements, alleged Istanbul agreements. They claim that these terms were set by Ukrainians, that it's only the West who forced the Ukrainians not to sign. In fact, it's all a fairy tale. There was no agreement. The crucial points in that paper that was sent by Ukrainians to Moscow and by Moscow to Ukrainians were not agreed upon. And the crucial issue was the security issue, the security guarantees. And the Russians were saying, okay, we agreed, and this is a typical thing. We basically accepted the Ukrainian draft. We just made little things, and those little things were absolutely the crucial ones. Yeah, the devil is in the details. In fact, if you go back to the Minsk agreements, 2015, again, the devil was in the details, and it was such a well-dressed devil that most Western observers and analysts completely missed what was important in this treaty, because there were little points that completely made it very beneficial to the Russians.
Well, we need to always bear in mind to read the small print.
Yes, the small print, the appendixes, and all the small qualifications. because that's usually where the gist of the matter is hidden.
Well, I suppose the main lesson is not to get our hopes up and try and see how to negotiate from a Russian perspective rather than from a Western business perspective. Witold Rodkieiwcz, thank you very much for coming to the programme.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure to have you. That's all we have time for today. You should know by now we're here Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, 2:15 p.m. CET. See you then.